Hello again and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael from TOEFLresources.com, and today I want to talk about TOEFL Speaking Question 4, which is sometimes referred to as the academic lecture question. This is the final question in the speaking section of the TOEFL. And yes, in case you're wondering, this video is updated for the new version of the TOEFL, which started in August of 2019. So in today's video, I'm going to start by talking about the structure of the question, how it's actually designed by ETS. After that, I'll give you a template you can use to answer the question. I'll talk a little bit about taking notes. I'll give you a sample answer. And at the end, I'll talk about the new scoring system used by ETS. So let's get started by talking about the structure of the question. Now, this is quite important because ETS never really changes the structure of this question. They use the same techniques to design it every single week. So pay attention. First, you're going to listen to an academic lecture. This will be between 1.5 minutes and 2.5 minutes long. It's going to be about some academic term, concept, or process. This will likely be illustrated using 2 examples from the real world. In some cases, though, it might be illustrated with 1 example with 2 clear parts, like a before and after part or a cause and effect part. Now, the lecture starts with a short introduction that states and defines the subject. That's between 3 and 5 sentences. After the introduction, the examples are given one after another. Finally, you will be asked a specific question about the lecture that mostly requires that you summarize the examples. Let's get a little bit more specific regarding these lectures and talk about what you can expect to hear. Now, I did a survey of about 600 students who took the test recently, and 60% of them told me they got a lecture related to biology and animals. That's the most common, and it's always been the most common. So be prepared for something like that. However, 17% of them said they got something related to business and marketing. Another 17% said they got something related to psychology or learning, and 6% said they got something kind of related to art, history, or literature. Now, this list is not exclusive. You could totally get something else. However, these are the most common subject areas. Meanwhile, I asked the same students about the number of examples, and an overwhelmingly 70% of them said they got 2 examples. Only 30% of them said they got 1 example. Be prepared for either type, but yeah, it seems like most of the time you're going to hear 2 examples. Why don't we get even more specific as to the content of these lectures? I asked these students to kind of share with me what they remember from the test. And on the screen, you can see 6 of the lectures that were remembered. One of the students told me they got something about how animals adapt to life deep in the ocean. So at the beginning of the lecturer says that life is really difficult deep in the ocean and animals need special features in order to survive. And then he gave 2 examples of animals that have special adaptations. Another one was about how unused factories can be adapted to help communities. Now, this one's interesting because it's about a subject that is not mentioned on the list I gave you on the screen last time, but it seems kind of interesting. So the lecturer had 2 examples of how factories have been refurbished and renovated to serve citizens in modern communities. Another student said he got a lecture about how dragonflies are the most effective predators. So each example was a special feature of dragonflies that help them hunt better. Another student said he got a lecture about preserving old artwork, which had 2 methods that are used to preserve this old art. Another one said he got something about animals using colors to escape from predators. And another student said he got something about positive and negative reinforcement in learning. So the first example was how positive reinforcement is used, and the second example is about how negative reinforcement is used. So what you can see here is that these are pretty challenging topics. They're not easy. And I really think that question 4 is the most challenging question in the speaking section of the test. So make sure you do plenty of practice questions with, from good textbooks, and make sure you do some general listening practice to just kind of like short lectures that you can find on YouTube or something that will hone your listening skills when you're dealing with challenging academic topics. All right, so finally, you're going to get a question prompt. Now, you can pause the video if you want to read all of them, but basically, they look something like this. Using the points and examples from the lecture, explain whatever the concept or term is. The only variation is sometimes they're going to actually mention what the example is. So it could say, using the example of the dragonfly, explain whatever. But basically, they're asking you to summarize the points and examples from the lecture. You will be given 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to speak. All right, so how do you put together your answer? Well, on the screen now, you can see a basic template that I recommend to most of my students. It has 4 parts. First of all, you should introduce the subject and transition to the examples all in one sentence. Something like this. The lecturer explains whatever by giving 2 examples or by giving an example. Easy and short. Next, you should state what the first example is, or in the case of one long example, the first part. And the template is pretty sparse here. First, she describes, and then just shove it full of all the details you can remember. And, I'm going to give you some notes and an example later to show you what I mean. Third, state the second example or the second part. Second, she mentions, and then all the details. And finally, a short conclusion. These examples demonstrate. Now, you might have noticed this is the only speaking question where I recommend a conclusion. I just think it's somewhat important to summarize the main idea at the end of your answer. But I'll talk more about conclusions in just a moment. All right, before I give you the sample, just a few tips and tricks to bring your answer to the next level. These are pretty much the same tricks I recommend for all the speaking questions, so I'll keep it brief. First of all, give me transitional phrases like as a result or consequently. For example, therefore. These things give your answer more flow, and I think they improve the topic development part of your answer. Focus mostly on the examples. Those should make up about 50 seconds of your answer. That opening sentence should just be like 9 or 10 seconds. If you are a slow speaker, omit the conclusion. That's the first thing you can shorten. I want you to use a mix of simple and compound sentences if possible. This will make your grammar look more sophisticated, and it will impress the human scorer. Lastly, your conclusion should be a bit more detailed than your introduction, and I'm going to show you what I mean in an example on the next screen. All right, so today's sample question is taken from the TOEFL IBT Speaking Questions PDF, page 10. Look for the one about initial prices. Now, this is an official document from ETS, and I'm going to put a link to it down below in the video description. I do encourage you to take a minute to load up that PDF so you can read the lecture transcript as you look at my notes and as you look at my sample answer. I think that will, help you understand what I'm trying to say here. For the record, the question prompt in this case goes like this. Using the points and examples from the lecture, explain the 2 pricing strategies described by the lecturer. So, taking notes. Now, a couple things I want to emphasize most of all about taking notes for this question. First up, the most important thing you got to take notes from are the 2 examples. So those sentences at the beginning where I said the lecturer introduced the topic, those are somewhat less important. Most of your notes are going to come from the 2 examples that are mentioned in the lecture. And then secondly, as far as those two examples go, everything is important. There's almost nothing that you really need to delete. So you should try to include as much of that in your notes and then in your answer as possible. Now, you're not going to be able to include everything, but I do want to emphasize that almost everything is equally important. So like a native speaker who's giving a 30-point answer will just be very safe to include all of the details and, be really in-depth when he's summarizing those examples. All right, so now let's get a little bit more specific to the question at hand. Over here, I've got the first example, and I've got all my notes about that. I start by taking a quick note about what I like to call the main thing. Now, I know thing is kind of a stupid word, but sometimes it's a feature, sometimes it's a characteristic, sometimes it's a decision. So I'm just calling it a thing. The main thing in this case is a high initial price. After that, I kind of get the general details that are given about a high initial price. In this case, I'm writing about how it gives a product a positive image and how people know it will be cheaper later, but they want it as soon as possible. Now you can see I'm using like sentence fragments. I'm not using proper grammar. I'm trying to make my notes really quick. And then after that, I'm kind of getting as many details as I can about the real life example. And in this case, I'm getting notes about high-tech products like video recorders, cameras, and cell phones. Over here, it's the second example. And then I got the main thing at the top, which is a low initial price. And then I get the details and how it's used when the market is saturated and a company needs to undercut competitors. And then I get the real life details about a new computer company. Now, sometimes you're going to get lots and lots of general details and a short real life example. Other times you might get a really long real life example, but just a few general details. Broadly speaking, though, listen for the main thing, the details, and the example. That's what you're trying to get, ideally. All right, so how do I turn those notes into an actual answer? Well, basically, you just want to follow the template. I promise I won't read this. You can pause the video if you want. But in red, I've got the template, right? And I've just filled in the blanks. The lecturer explains pricing strategies by giving two examples. To begin with, she describes. Second, she mentions. These examples illustrate. That's it. Now, what did I do to kind of bring this to the next level? Well, as I said, I wanted to include some compound sentences. So I've used the coordinating conjunction but, and I think I used the coordinating conjunction and down here, and maybe I even used but again over here. So that kind of creates some compound sentences. So my answer is not just simple sentence, simple sentence, simple sentence, simple sentence. It's simple and compound sentences. I also used a few of the transitions that I mentioned earlier. I think I've got as a result somewhere down here, and I've got, for example, later on in the answer. Those are the phrases you need to use to bring your answer to the next level. Also, the conclusion is a little bit longer than the introduction. So in the introduction, I'm just quickly stating, what the concept is, pricing strategies. The lecturer explains pricing strategies by giving two examples. But here in the conclusion, I've kind of stretched it out a little bit. These examples illustrate how companies determine the initial prices of their goods. So I'm a bit more specific and detailed. The other thing I've tried to accomplish here is a use of a wide-ranging vocabulary. So you notice I used products, right? Because that's what's used in the lecture. But then instead of repeating products, I've tried to change it to merchandise over here, and I've tried to change it to goods over here. In order to get a decent score in the speaking section, I need to show off my vocabulary. I need to avoid repeating words. All right, that's all I have to say about creating your answer. I want to finish the video by talking a little bit about how your score is determined. So first of all, you're going to be graded by one human rater. And they're going to judge you based on your delivery, your language use, and your topic development. Now, this system has been in place since like 2006, so this should not be news to you. But basically, delivery is how well you actually speak your answer. That is, can the grader understand what you are saying? Do they have to like listen a few times to make out your words? That's going to hurt you. Language use relates mostly to your spoken grammar. If you have a lot of grammar mistakes, they're going to give you a low score for your language use. But if your grammar is a bit more sophisticated, because you've been using those compound sentences I recommended earlier, your language use score will go up. Lastly, topic development really relates to the accuracy of your details. So are you getting the right details from the lecture? Are you properly talking about a low initial price and a high initial price? If you can get the right details, your topic development score will go up. And also, I believe the use of those transitional phrases like therefore and however and as a result, those also influence your topic development. Now, there is a new feature of the scoring system, and that's referred to as the speech rater. This is new since August of 2019, and basically it is a computer program which is judging your score. And this computer program has a whole bunch of different features it examines. Like I think there's like 15 or 20 special unique features it examines, but broadly speaking, I think it's checking you based on 4 categories. First of all is fluency. This is judging things like your words per second. It's also judging things like the number of pauses you have in your answer. So if you actually stop your answer for, 2 or 3 seconds to think about what you have to say next, that's going to hurt your fluency score. And this is also where you're going to be punished for long and type pauses. So you want to avoid those. Next up is your pronunciation and your rhythm. This is very similar to the delivery score I mentioned that the human rater checks you on. This is based on how clear your answer is, how easy it is for your words to be made out, how your vowels and your consonants are pronounced, and generally your intonation and your word stress. Down here is grammar. That should be pretty obvious. Are you making grammar mistakes? Well, that's going to lower your score. But are you using more sophisticated grammar? That's going to increase your score. And finally, vocabulary. Again, that should be pretty obvious. If you're using very short, simple words, your vocabulary score is going to go down. If you're using more advanced words, your vocabulary score will go up. Now, I should mention that the human rater and the speech rater seem to have equal value in terms of your final score. And one other interesting feature is that if you request a rescore, according to ETS, the speech rater is not used. So what I'm saying is, if you ask for your score to be reviewed, it will be reviewed only by a human rater. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of whether or not it's better now to request a rescore, but it is an interesting detail I want to mention here. All right, that's it for today's video. That's all I have to say about TOEFL Speaking Question 4. But if you want to, find out more about what I do, you can check me out at TOEFLresources.com. That's my website where you can find guides to every section of the test, and you can sign up for my essay evaluation and speaking evaluation services. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. I promise I will answer them as soon as I possibly can. And I guess I'll leave it at that. But come back next week for another video. I'll see you then, guys. Take care.